Let's move now to Lansing and the push for criminal justice reform. It's something that we've talked about. Michigan has the highest incarceration rate in the Midwest. We pay $2 billion a year for it. And just a week ago, the state Senate passed a 21-bill package trying to cut down on the rate of repeat offenders, how to make sure that parole guidelines are followed, and the programs to help offenders once they get out. Just last week, we aired a One Detroit documentary called Pathways to Prison, looking at why our incarceration rate is high in the state of Michigan, the struggles that people have in the system, and some potential changes. So before debating the bills, this gives you a sense of how people are impacted by parole reforms and reentry programs. Take a look.
Aaron Suganuma counsels substance abusers in Ann Arbor. He earned a master's degree in social work, an outstanding scholar who found a career he hadn't planned.
I had this dream of actually being a reporter. I wanted to be a journalist and go to New York City, go to the Columbia School of Journalism. What actually ended up happening was that I wasn't actually going to class.
Aaron enrolled in a local college, working full-time at restaurants, but he got into trouble when he was 22.
I was physically dependent on drugs. Eventually, the money ran out, and I started committing crimes to be able to support my habit. One thing led to another, and I ended up in prison.
He received 51 months to 10 years for armed robbery, with an out date of January 19, 2009. He was a model inmate, but when the out date came, nothing happened.
This piece of paper that I've been looking at for years saying that this is when you're going to get out, all of a sudden that just disappears. It's no longer guaranteed. There's nothing that I can do about it.
Aaron did get out later in 2009. We live in the era of mass incarceration. Michigan has the highest incarceration rate in the Great Lakes region, spending $2 billion a year, $35,000 for each of the 42,000 people behind bars.
You're spending more money on the failures than you are on the successes.
Back then, Dennis Schrantz, high up in Governor Jennifer Granholm's administration, came up with a plan.
We designed reform policy and practices to try to improve prisoner post-release performance. We named it the Michigan Prisoner Reentry Initiative, and it kind of took off.
The idea? Create a system that gives more help to prisoners when they get out. So the Michigan Prisoner Reentry Initiative, MPRI, came to be, funded by the state with some foundation support.
And with that good plan, you're less likely to commit crime, less likely to commit violations, and that's one of the reasons that it had bipartisan support. Who's against crime reduction, right? If you ask folks, do you want them out with a plan or without a plan, they'll say, well, with a plan.
Calvin Evans served 24 years on a murder charge. His family was working poor, his mother a victim of domestic violence.
I wanted to break that cycle, and so I was willing to take the risk of selling drugs when crack cocaine happened in order to do that. And it was worth the risk to me because all I was going to be is all I ever seen.
Calvin was convicted of a murder he didn't commit, but he does admit to other illegal activities. Before his parole hearing, he created his own 5-year business plan for when he'd get out.
So I presented this to the parole board and said, this is what it is that I'm going to do. This is who it is that I am. And so now I can say to individuals who are coming out that this is a tried and proven method.
Now Calvin helps lead a new program called D-Live at Sinai Grace Hospital in Detroit, working with recovering gunshot victims who need advocates to help turn their lives around. His plan for success includes creating successful outcomes for others.
And coming up on 4 years, what actually happened, I never thought that I'd be working for Wayne State University Sinai Grace Hospital. I never thought that.
A key to MPRI's success, community engagement. It was agreed in Lansing. Spend the money locally to support prisoner reentry.
They are going to be in your neighborhood. They're going to be either violating the conditions of their supervision and committing new crimes, or they're going to be employed and paying taxes.
MPRI was riding high. Prisons closed. But then the economy tanked. That while the foundation supporting MPRI collapsed. A victim of white-collar criminal Bernie Madoff. When Governor Snyder took over, MPRI got an overhaul. Now it's called Offender Success. Now with the turn in the state's job climate, the Department of Corrections' focus is helping employers.
Michigan's economy is really on the upswing, and there are a lot of companies that are looking to hire, and the biggest thing we hear is that they just can't find enough qualified, skilled workers.
I'm really excited. Today it's 225 returning citizens training in jobs, and I hope before long it's going to be 1,000.
Recently, Detroit Mayor Michael Duggan joined 2 returning citizens. That is, parolees from the Detroit Reentry Center, part of an asbestos abatement training program paid for with a federal grant.
We have nearly 3,000 individuals a year released from the state prison system who come back to the city of Detroit. And if we don't create opportunities, those folks are likely to get up to the kinds of things that got them in trouble in the first place.
In Detroit, well-paying jobs in construction and rehabilitation await, as incentives favor employers who hire those who live in the city.
If I hadn't took this program, I didn't have many options at all. So that's why I felt, when I seen the sign up for this, I was like, I jumped on the opportunity. You know what I mean? It's very important to me as I'm trying to take steps towards becoming a productive member of society.
There's one other big effort to reduce the prison population. State Representative Kurt Heisey has spent a few years on legislation to get more prisoners out sooner. House Bill 4138 would change how the parole board deals with prisoners when it's time for them to leave.
I look at it as parole reform, to make sure that we are recognizing and rewarding individuals incarcerated in prison who are trying to better themselves, who are getting a GED, who are staying clean from drugs and gang violence.
The bill is called presumptive parole, presuming that when a well-behaved prisoner's out date comes, they might really get out. Reformers say the parole board can hold prisoners long past their out dates for what are called substantial and compelling reasons that can seem more arbitrary than definite.
Some board members will use pretty subjective factors like doesn't show enough empathy, lacks insight, very subjective assessments.
4138 would better define the reasons prisoners should be held. An estimated 3,200 more would be released over the 5 years when it's enacted.
In no way forces the board to release people that there's reason to believe are currently dangerous.
Sounds well and good, but still, 4138 has its detractors.
We're crowded. Macomb County, Southeast Michigan, Wayne County, Oakland County, our jails are crowded.
For county sheriffs, it's simple. When more parolees get out, it's inevitable. More of them will join the ranks in county jails.
This is just going to be a burden on the local taxpayers from the local control and put more strain on our sheriff's budgets.
Winter on Detroit's west side. Substance abuse counselor Aaron Suganuma gets together with his group, called Nation Outside, which is trying to give a voice to the formerly incarcerated.
I didn't know what success meant. I didn't see people getting past this point in their life. I didn't know. I needed a model for it.
MPRI helped Aaron return as a productive citizen. But the parole process, as he sees it, needs work.
This unknowing and lack of faith in the system, I don't know how to count on this. How can I plan to be successful in re-entering if I don't even know when I'm going to get out?
It's such an interesting personal look at the people who are impacted by this. The House bill, they moved a little bit on last year, and now the Senate has picked it up. But they're still a little far apart in some things. But I don't think you can really emphasize enough the needing for reentry programs, and to even start. You were talking, Stephen, about starting inside when people are still incarcerated.
Right. I mean, that's where you have their attention. That's where you have the opportunity to change somebody's life. I mean, this is someone at the lowest point in their life going into the correction system for something that they've done, the whole process should be focused on how do you prevent that person from staying at that low point? How do you get that person to a different space? And that requires a different kind of mentality than we typically have about what the purpose of the correction system is. Too many people think it's about keeping people away from society or punishing them somehow. And really, it needs to be about correcting those things that have gone wrong in that person's life so that when they get out, which 98% of the people who go to prison end up back out. Most people don't get life sentences. They need to be able to put lives together that are productive.
And also making the point too that they need to know that when it says they're going to get out, that they do get out.
Well, that's the best way to protect society. I mean, if part of this goal here, if the other half of the correction system, the justice system, one's punishment and one's protecting society, you're much more likely to protect society by fixing what's wrong with these folks. I am not a big fan of prison as our only option for punishment. I think we need to deal with a lot of people outside of prison and focus on fixing them and stopping the criminal behavior, and then they're no longer a threat to society and they're living a useful life. We lock them away, throw away their lives, and when they come out, we haven't changed.
They don't have a lot of options.
And I really also don't really believe in these firm sentences. You're going to serve 20 years or you're going to serve 10. Send them to prison with the idea that you're going to serve until you're able and willing to come back in society and live a productive life without threatening your neighbors. If that takes 5 years, great. If it takes 20, not so great. But let's not treat every prisoner the same way.
I would also say you've got to back up, and when you're talking about helping people deal with where they are right now, there's a whole pipeline that we talk about to even how people get to that point.
Yeah.
And I would encourage you, head to MiWeek.org. We have a link to that entire Detroit One special, Pathways to Prison. Love for you to watch it. Tell us what you think about it, and it does address a lot of those problems that you have of people starting when they are just in grade school.
Absolutely, you see it in schools. You see the way schools respond to kids, and let's be honest, how they respond to African American kids, how they respond to African American boys who will grow up to populate prisons more so than any other demographic in our population. All of this stuff starts when they are very young and responding to behavior that may or may not be inappropriate, but doing it in a way that is about criminalizing that behavior as opposed to dealing with it.
And then you got the throwaway kids, all these kids that are in the foster system because their parents weren't able to take care of them. Nobody was able to take care of them in their family. And so they hop from place to place to place with no support, no anchor, no really value system in place. And they're fending for themselves. Well, they grow up eventually, and then we hold them responsible for the neglect as a society we've done their whole lives.
I got to say, and in this show that I worked on, and the folks here at PBS worked on as well, we address all of that. So go ahead, check that out at MiWeek.org.